What's up, Summoners? Kangas here, and today I'm running you through our Challenger Coach's best top laners for patch 11.7. While there's plenty of familiar faces, we also have a lot of new ones. The returnees are to be expected though because, OP picks are OP for a reason. So make sure to hit that sub button, and let's just jump into the video. The first pick we'll talk about is Wukong. Yes, Wukong is finding a ton of success recently. While this almost seems like he's coming out of nowhere, there's a good explanation for it. Remember how Gore Drinker and more recently Stridebreaker defined the top lane? I'm talking back-to-back metas where the best champions were all ones abusing the strongest items for the patch. Now that both of these have been nerfed, Wukong has had a chance to shine because most players prefer to run a different item on him, that being Divine Sunderer. This item turns Wukong into a nasty tank buster, and he still has enough burst damage to take out squishies just as easily. Also, if you want a better understanding of how to abuse a pick like Wukong, hit up a coach on ProGuides.com. We got tons of them who can help you improve, and we're even offering discounts on our subscriptions with the code RANKUP2021. Anyway, Wukong isn't only a 1v1 machine against tankier foes. His Q cracks their armor open and allows all of his physical damage dealing teammates to have a much easier time cutting them down. This means that regardless of whether he's split pushing or team fighting, Wukong provides noticeable impact. His damage is also pretty high against other popular top laners, most notably Juggernauts or fighters who build a ton of health. Divine Sunderer's bonus damage and healing makes these fights a lot easier than you'd expect. The best part is that Wukong isn't that hard to play. The hardest part is probably knowing how to best use your W. However, there are plenty of good ways and not so many bad ones. Avoid abilities, try to fake out opponents, or even use it during a close fight for just a little more damage. His other abilities are also very straightforward, and you should be able to carry games easily as long as you don't fall behind. He has a solid gap closer and some incredible crowd control with his ultimate, making him a great team fighter as well as a good split pusher. And it should come to nobody's surprise that FIORA is back as well. With nerfs to Essence Reaver, we expected less people to use that build now. Instead, it's more likely that players will fall back to Gore Drinker or perhaps even include a Trinity Force in their builds. FIORA is a split-pushing god, and with a Trinity Force in inventory, there's no doubt that she will decimate turrets with a little bit of alone time in the side lane. Although she's not the best team fighter, you can pretty much do whatever you want if you manage to get fed. Put in some time and practice on her though. FIORA has plenty of tools to help her outplay her opponents, but you gotta use them correctly. Her high mobility, damage, and W are so good in small fights, and after you learn some of the matchups, you should have no problem winning isolated 1v1s. Once you get rolling though, most of the pressure you apply should be in the side lane while split pushing. As FIORA, you have a ton of mobility that you can take advantage of. Set up vision, and you should be able to escape enemies when they send in the whole squad, or instead get ready for some 1v2 outplays. You'll also want to practice some turret dives. A fed FIORA can easily dive an enemy under their turret, but you obviously need to experiment and see just how far you can take things before you start inting. And before we move forward, let me ask our question of the day. Which item do you find yourself building the most and why? When I get full top lane, I mostly play tanks, so I definitely go Iceborne Gauntlet the most. But let me know your answer in the comments down below. One champion that's recently become quite popular is Cho'Gath. Especially in low elo, he has a ton of carry potential. Yes, even though he's a tank, he can still carry games. Cho'Gath deals a decent amount of damage, and both his Q and W have a ton of impact in fights. That is, if you can land them. This is probably why his win rate is higher in low elo. He got very close to 53% last patch in silver and below. That's extraordinarily high, and part of the reason that Cho'Gath is so strong in solo queue is that he punishes mistakes very hard. If you try to take a bad fight against him, you can expect to get slowed by his E and then comboed by his other abilities. After level 6, you really can't mess up because he gains an incredible amount of kill pressure with his ultimate. An important part about finding success with Cho'Gath comes down to knowing when to pick him. Although Cho'Gath can do pretty well in most lane matchups right now, you should pay attention to what champions are on the enemy team. A team stacked with extremely mobile enemies is going to make landing your Q pretty difficult. However, you should also consider how important your silence will end up being. Even against a champion like Lee Sin, for example, it's completely fine to miss your Q as long as you can silence them. You can stop them from getting away, or might even be able to silence him right before he tries to finish an insane insect combo. Cho'Gath does pretty well against other tanks, and can even win against many top lane fighters when he manages to land his abilities. Otherwise, you can just turn those matchups into farm lanes with your sustaining passive. The reason Cho'Gath does so well against other tanks is that tanks typically lack burst damage. You have so much sustain with your passive that you can usually just shrug off any damage by healing it back up. Anytime you trade evenly, you win because you'll regain health by last hitting minions. Next up, Darius is still a powerful solo queue carry. His immense skill pressure and ability to snowball make him really oppressive to lane against. A ton of champions struggle against him, especially because of how long the top lane is. When close to Darius' turret, there's going to be a long road back to safety, meaning that he has plenty of time to chase you down with Ghost and get a solo kill. When ahead, Darius is your ideal Juggernaut. Hard to kill, but also lethal to fight against. Since he's so snowbally, Darius can hard carry mid-game teamfights, as he'll usually be at a huge power advantage over his opponents. Most of the time, he'll be tanky enough and have enough damage to get work done, while enemy carries are still busy completing their crucial items. Again, with Stride Breaker being added this season, Darius' team fighting is much more potent than before. Previously, he only had his summoner spells to rely on when closing the distance, but now he has an active item handy to help him chase down squishy enemies. A champion that's bound to rise in popularity this patch is Jax. Buffs to Trinity Force are great for all split pushing top laners, and we expect Jax to absolutely love the changes to the item. It's honestly just the best for him right now. His base AD is incredibly high since they decided to buff him in patch 11.5, and as he levels up, he'll drastically increase his damage output with Trinity Force's Spellblade passive. Jax's long-range jump also makes him terrifying to play against as an immobile carry. Marksmen especially struggle against Jax, also because of his counter-strike. Just when you think you're about to kill him, he starts spinning that staff and you're in for a bad time. A fed Jax can basically 100-0 you over the course of that stun duration too. This means a lot of enemies have no choice but to run when you're using your counter-strike. And Jax isn't even the easiest to kite, since he has a relatively low cooldown on his Q, and once he manages to get on top of an enemy, the damage, speaks for itself. Of course, you can always resort to split pushing too. It's always nice when you have a champion who can do both. The fact that Jax is a terrifying teamfight threat as well as a fast split pusher leaves several options available to you as the player. A quick note about the build is that most players will finish Blade of the Ruined King first and then move on to Trinity Force. However, there are some players that still rush Trinity Force, so see what you like better. If you want early sustain, which I'm sure most players do, you'll want to follow the trend. Next up is Volibear Top. This pick is one that's really popular in Korea right now and is even being seen played by some Academy LCS teams. Laning against him is not easy by any means. He deals a ridiculous amount of damage, and if you're not careful against him, you're gonna get crushed. Of course, if you're the one who chooses to play him, it's the other way around. While I can't say this as an absolute truth, I think the reason Volibear is so popular in Korea is partly because of the shorter games. Volibear's laning phase is where he's the most oppressive. Not only is he a dense brick that wins several 1v1s, he's also a talented turret diving specialist. After level 6, you can just call your jungler over and it's essentially a free kill every time. You use your ultimate, which by the way deals a lot of damage even at rank 1, and get to say you no longer have a turret. While the duration is only 3 seconds early on, that's still plenty of time to finish off an enemy that you managed to trade with prior to the turret dive. There's lots of situations where you don't even need a jungler to do this. Having vision of the enemy jungler and knowing that they're not on the top side of the map is usually enough information for you to pull off the trigger and go for your own solo dive. Even if your enemies run for it, you can essentially zone them from their turret and deny them a ton of XP afterwards. Later in the game, you're still a potent juggernaut and your ultimate continues to disable turrets, meaning that you can go for some really ballsy plays with your other 4 teammates. URGOT continues to dominate even after nerfs. His damage output is just way too high and his ultimate is iconic. Fall below the health threshold and you are gone. Even after nerfs, he continues to take turrets rather quickly, forcing players to either fight him or helplessly watch their structure break down. Inevitably, URGOT has to be a repeat for good reason. In spite of the nerf, his overall win rate only dropped by 0.1%. The end result was a 53.7% win rate at the end of last patch. Whatever it is, there's something OP about this champion, and in my opinion, it's just the damage output. Before this season, you could do your best to outplay him, kite him, and space around his effective range. But with the addition of mythic items like Stride Breaker and even Frostfire Gauntlet, they've allowed URGOT to realize his maximum damage potential. This has left him much stronger, even if he's received small direct nerfs. Sunfire Aegis was buffed on patch 11.6, and it's no surprise that tanks have seen a spike in popularity. One of these tanks is Shen. He's had his moment here and there over the past couple of seasons, and once again, Shen's in a really good spot. Unfortunately, the lack of true power spike at level 6 still means that he'll eventually get outscaled by split pushers, but in spite of this, it's still worth picking him up because he deals plenty of damage even without an ultimate. The buffs to Sunfire Aegis also increase his overall damage output, and honestly, he doesn't need a damaging ultimate to kill his enemies. Although Shen isn't the perfect blind pick with 0 bad matchups, you can easily play around the tough ones. Remember that it's not always about winning lane, so put that ego aside. You're not supposed to win losing matchups, and instead, your only job is to farm and impact the map somewhere else with your ultimate. That's completely fine, and it's another way that you can carry games. Another advantage to playing Shen is you don't need to feel obligated to take teleport. His ultimate is better as long as your target doesn't get bursted down while you're channeling it. You don't need a ward, structure, or minion, just a living ally. So an aggressive summoner spell like Ignite can be taken in teleport's place, meaning you can look for some cheesy solo kills. The other tank that we'll mention again is MALPHITE. He's been popping marksmen since the beginning of time, and he showed last patch that he is still one scary rock. Currently, MALPHITE has a lot of winning matchups in the top lane, especially because AP top laners are still struggling a bit. He has the hardest time against other tanks as they don't really have an issue building some early magic resist against him. However, if you can manage to turn tank versus tank matchups into farm lanes, you can still end up on top. This is because MALPHITE has some of the best backline access in the entire game with his ultimate. Tanks are typically pretty slow and give enemies time to react, but MALPHITE's ultimate almost always hits or at least forces an enemy to flash because of its speed and pressure. Get hit by it, and you can immediately expect to get hit by a burst of follow-up damage from MALPHITE and his teammates. And our final pick for today is Nasus. We mentioned in our tier list videos that he is a solid S tier pick for low elo players. The longer game times and lower levels of skill make him a champion that you can abuse for easy wins. When your opponents aren't very good at closing out games, you get more time to farm with your Q. I'm sure all of us have seen where that eventually goes, and Nasus hits that point where he one-shots everything in his path. Another benefit he gets in low elo is that players don't really punish him that well. Sometimes players will push the lane too hard, or they'll trade ineffectively and eventually allow Nasus to set up a freeze. Other times they commit too hard after level 6 and fall victim to a solo kill to Nasus's increased health, decreased Q cooldown, and persistent aura damage. You basically get more chances to play the game as Nasus. Going even against your opponent as Nasus is enough, and that's the beauty of the pick. There's no pressure on you when you pick him, the pressure is all on your opponents to not mess up and know what to do about it. And that'll wrap up our Challenger Coach's top lane champions for patch 11.7. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and check out the description for a link to join our community Discord. Until next time, as always, best of luck on the Rift, stay hydrated, and I'll see you next time.